Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today, we're going to be looking at the skill known as Hunger, which does require a pretty significant investment to get to, and generally, you're not going to put more than 1 point into it because it's kind of a one-point wonder. In fact, most people don't even use it, but if you do use it, you're probably not going to invest a large number of points in it. Hunger is very specifically an ability that you are using to steal life and mana. It has some pretty hefty penalties on it, and it's the last of the shapeshifting abilities that we have to go over on the tree. Hunger's negative 75% damage is actually like pretty massive. Basically, you only do 1/4 of the damage that you would normally output at any given time. So, you are unable to dish out your full fury, so to speak. Now, if you look at the damage difference between, say, for instance, Maul and Hunger, we've got 7,785 damage here, and we've got 2,002 for the Hunger. So our damage has been stunted pretty significantly. Now, you can increase the damage output of Hunger by, for instance, using Maul. So if we use Maul here, we can definitely get some pretty good damage output. Even with the full damage from Maul, we're not going to get like a super duper amazing number here. But let's pretend, for instance, that we had Max Werebear and Max Maul. And why am I using the bear specifically? The answer to that question is pretty much that, well, Werewolf doesn't use this ability for the most part. Since it has a pretty massive amount of Life Leech, and Feral Rage also has Life Leech, instead of investing 4 points to get to Hunger, most werewolves will just use Feral Rage for the Life Leech instead, which actually does work with Fury, whereas Hunger is its own specific ability, so it's different. Now, this particular ability, when it's maxed out, can dish out not a lot, but decent. Its main issue is that even with the best of weapons, it doesn't really do a whole lot. With the worst of weapons, something a little bit more along the lines of what you might actually be using on a character as opposed to an F-Zotted Reaper's Toll. Let's go calculate this out with a, I don't know, a Bone Snap. I think I have a Bone Snap sitting in my stash here. So this is a upgraded Bone Snap with an F rune in it. It's 200 to 295 damage. And this gives me a damage output of about 3,595. When I throw Maul on there, not too much of a difference here. Throw Hunger, and you can see I only do about 922 damage. And Cody is desperately trying to show me his beaver. Give me this beaver. This is Cody's beaver. He wants to show everybody his beaver. He said, "This is my beaver. Gives it to me. This is mine. You cannot have." How fitting to have the wolf up here while we're talking about the shape-shifting druid. So when we take the damage output of Hunger, we can figure out how much Life Leech the ability does. And so what we have to do is we actually have to figure this out in a calculation. And lo and behold, I have graphics. So what you need to know about Life Leech is that there are penalties. There's a lot of penalties. Life Leech does not work as beautifully as it would seem. And what I'm going to show you guys is how these penalties affect the overall Life Leech that you're getting from an ability like this. So first off, we got to take our damage output, which is 922. Then we need to let's get it to its maximum. So let's say that we've doubled the damage. And in fact, you know what? Let's go ahead and get our Maul bonus too, which I feel like will also help it out a little bit. So if we were running a Maul Bear, we would of course have our maximum Maul bonus. So to get that, we've got to build up 16 charges of Maul. And once we have 16 charges of Maul, we are maxed out at 1,345. So that's the number we're going to use for our study here. So 1,345 damage. 1,345. Let's multiply it by 2. Let's say we got a nice Deadly Strike proc. So we got 2,690. We have most monsters in Hell difficulty tend to have about a 50% physical damage reduction. So we have to take that into account. So we also have to subtract 50% from this, which brings us back down to our 1,345. Then we need to figure out what our leech potential is. How much are we actually getting from this physical damage that we are dishing out? And it has to be physical damage, by the way. So we have 143% life leech. So we can just simply take this, and we could go plus 43%, which would give us our total number of life leech, which is 1,923.35. Then we have to subtract the penalty. So there's two different penalties, and I believe drain effectiveness comes first, then the difficulty penalty. So let's say, for instance, we were fighting a monster and they had a drain effectiveness of 50%. Then we have to subtract another 50% here, which brings us down to 961. And then we have to subtract the difficulty penalty. So in Hell difficulty, it is a 66% penalty, which brings us down to 326.96 life leech. And another thing that you have to know about life leech is it always rounds down. Always. So if we're at 326.9, it is always going to round down to 326 as opposed to going up to 327. In fact, it might even go lower than that. It might go to 325 just out of spite. And I've seen that before many times. So we're getting about 326 life per strike on hunger. We have about 2,225 health here. And of course, that goes even higher once we get our Oak Sage out. And we're looking at 3,156 HP. So we take our 326, let's see, 3,156 divided by our 325. And we have to hit about 9 to 10 times in Hell difficulty versus a monster that has 50% physical damage reduction and probably a drain effectiveness of about 50% to fill our HP to completely full. And this is basically hunger in a nutshell. It is a lifesteal ability, not really a damage ability. The other really cool thing about hunger that I've always kind of loved is that it doesn't swipe. So you'll notice that when you run around with Maul and you attack things, Maul specifically swipes at the target. It is a you know, like you bopping the dude above, you know, upside the head. You know, you are actually hitting them. When you use hunger, he is biting. Like, he is specifically biting the target. It also has a very quick attack rate, so in general, you can usually hit hunger quite a few times before it finishes. And since it also gains the effect of Maul, increasing the damage output, and also potentially increasing the speed of the ability, it's going to attack really fast. So you're going to be able to bite. Most people, to be honest with you, just kind of don't use hunger. It is an ability that you can use, but the main issue with hunger is just simply the fact that it takes so many skill points to get down to. If you're a werewolf, you've got to put 4 points in the bear tree to get access to it. If you're a bear, you have to put 1, 2, 3 points to get access to it, which is definitely a little bit different. And honestly, the wolf doesn't tend to use it because Feral Rage is better. It's easier to access and costs less skill points. It also works with Fury, as opposed to requiring the use of its own ability. So when you are specifically a werewolf druid, you are usually not going to use it. If you're a bear wolf, a bear druid, it is actually a pretty decent one, and it's actually pretty good to use because you can restore your life really quickly with it. And because frickin' druids just have so much frickin' HP, one of the main issues with the druid is that these little dinky potions right here that only restore like 180 or I can't even remember what the max one is, but the max one restores even more. And you can restore your health a lot quicker with hunger than you can with the potions alone. And it's important to remember this. Like, if you're in a situation where your HP is just tanked all the way down to the bottom, hunger can be useful to just fill up that massive HP pool back to full. Unfortunately, though, at really low levels with very poor weapons, it doesn't really do a lot of lifesteal. It's also not going to work on physically immune targets, and just in general, you might find it doesn't really perform as well as it should, especially when you can just get life leech from, you know, other various items. Like, for instance, if you have a decent amount of life leech on your character as a whole, you won't necessarily have to worry about it. And as far as mana is concerned, most of the melee builds usually get by just fine with a mediocre amount of mana leech. So it doesn't necessarily need to be used. Now, one of the cool things is you can get a helmet that has hunger on it. So if you do find a helmet, you know, like say for instance you're making the new Metamorphosis rune word, helmets can have hunger, and then you won't have to invest those points to get to it, which is definitely nice. The other thing is that when you're using Fire Claws, because it is a physical damage ability, Fire Claws has no physical damage. It's just the base attack. So if you go to your base attack ability, it's whatever your base attack is, and that means that you're gonna get very little damage output with hunger, especially because it has negative 75. You know, negative 75%. So if you're utilizing this ability with a Fire Claws Druid, you might not necessarily get the effect that you're looking for because of how poor the physical damage output is of a Fire Claws Druid. Especially if you're going with something like a 6 Shield Phase Blade or something like that that has even less physical damage. The less physical damage you have, the less you're going to get in return. As you can see by the calculation that's still up on the screen, physical damage is one of the main components of figuring out exactly how much life leech you can get, depending on how many times you hit the target. I think that's pretty much it for this ability. There's really not a whole lot to go over with Hunger. The only reason to sink points into it is increased attack rating. It's really a one-point wonder. If I dump 20 points into it right now, you'll see that it goes from 143% to 185%, which isn't even really that big of an increase, considering that I just dumped 20 skill points into it. And the attack rating was really the only thing that increased massively. And if you're not having any trouble hitting targets with it, then you don't necessarily need to pump points into it anyway. Some of these builds are really like easy builds though as far as points go though. So like if you build a bear druid, that's 20 points and 20 points, and maybe you put 1 point here, and that's like what, you know, like 41 points. So you definitely do have extra points that you can spend as a bear druid, which means you could potentially put points into hunger if you wanted to. But there's definitely a lot of other things, a lot of other abilities like Cyclone Armor, Ravens, Grizzly Bear, you know, like maybe a Carrion Vine, Oak Sage, things like that that you might be better off spending those points in anyway. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we are just talking about Life Leech and the Hunger ability. And as always, keep watching.